Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my outdoor worm bag. It's a couple grow bags nested within each other, and you might even be able to hear the plastic rustling in between the two layers of fabric. It really gives the system a good sort of water retention, moisture retention capability. This system out here does seem to attract interest from the local creatures that live here in and around my yard. I could see evidence of something reaching down in here and burrowing some material out. Either, I don't know, I usually assume that whatever it is that's poking around in here is interested in the worms, because the food that I put in here is usually buried pretty deep, although a lot of critters with a good sense of smell will know what's going on here regardless of how deep I put the stuff in. And even this little missing section of the plywood was chewed away by some critter too in pursuit of the contents of this system. So it does seem like having a little bit of plywood on top, even though it does have the potential to get chewed away, protects the system a little bit. Pretty interesting to see how the worms are actually starting to nibble through this top covering of cardboard as well, gradually. By being right underneath the plywood, which doesn't really allow for moisture to evaporate out, the moisture is recirculating beneath there, making it nice and damp. Every now and then a little piece of plastic or debris sneaks into my system. Look at that, we got a little isopod, little roly-polies. I always used to get a kick out of these little guys when I was a kid. The way they turn into a perfect spherical shape when they're sensing that they're in danger. So over here is where I assume that a little bit of excavation occurred by whatever it is that was poking this little arm down into here. But they really didn't get very far. So just a quick recap of the last check-in on this system, which was now 14 days ago. We came in here with recruits from my compost barrel, so we went in there first, attempted to get a number of worms together. And it does seem like people are still commenting on that video, providing me with estimates on how many worms they believe we managed to recruit from the other bin and drop into here to increase this system's population. So perhaps during the next check-in, after the commenting on that video has subsided, I'll have some sort of a final estimate on how many worms we added to this system. But it wasn't much. It seemed like maybe most people were estimating somewhere in the 200 or 300 range, I believe. So I'm curious to see how things feel in here, because there's been a lot of rain lately. And I always assume with that piece of card, well, not only the cardboard, but the cardboard's not protecting things, it's the plywood. I always assume that the plywood is going to deflect any moisture trying to get into here and just allow it to run down the sides. In fact, whatever the slope of the plywood is, I believe most of the moisture is probably going to go in the direction of whatever end of that piece of plywood is lowest. End? Is there an end to a circular shape? Edge? Which edge? Which edge of the plywood is the lowest? So the one little funny thing we were doing last time, and maybe even the time before, was poking around looking for this one leftover piece of material. It was actually one piece of material that I sawed into two pieces. It was the seed from a mango. So a mango seed is actually encapsulated within this thick, tough husk. And then I attempted to make that more readily available to the worms by sawing it right down the middle. So this nice big seed was chopped in the middle, opening up both sides so the worms can get access to the inside. And one of them keeps showing up. And I'd even gotten to the point where I was able to just like tear the husk open because it had deteriorated to that point. So I think if we bump into the one that we have been finding repeatedly, it'll be the one that's been torn open. But there was the other one in here too, which we've had no luck finding whatsoever. And we were pretty thorough past few check-ins, because I've done kind of what I'm doing here, which is just pretty much till up the entire contents of the material as deep as I could reach, right to the bottom of the bag, to aerate everything and to just pretty much, you know, give myself an opportunity to see how things look. But I guess at the same time I'm also, oh, sensing around to see what I can see, and I believe that we've just found one of the halves of the mango seed. And guess what? This is the one that we've been searching for. This is the missing half of the mango seed. And after, I guess, 2 or 3 check-ins now, without any luck finding this thing, the worms have had peace and quiet inside this half of a mango seed, working it down without any interruption. So that's kind of cool to see how they're working that thing down. And I believe, I think right down the middle is where we're going to end up finding the other half, the one that we have been bumping into a few times recently, the torn open one. So there does seem to be a good bit of moisture in here, but luckily it's also combined with a fair bit of, remaining bedding material in here. Lots and lots of leaves. I think mainly leaves were used as the bedding in here. When it comes to building my outdoor systems, I do prefer to use more natural bedding materials, while, down in my wormery, I'm perfectly content to use more processed materials like paper, shredded cardboard, stuff like that. But somehow when I come outside to tend to my outdoor system, I just want to have something that looks and feels a little bit more natural. And I guess that might be the reason I don't want to use paper shreds out here. The only thing that seems to dominate are these little tiny stems of each leaf that ends up in this system. Mostly maple leaves, I assume. I mean, I do have a holly, but I obviously don't want to use holly because otherwise I'd be getting poked left and right by the leaves of the holly. But since I am using gathered leaves from my yard, using my leaf vac, and I guess once in a while a holly leaf does sort of sneak around in the yard, I usually try to use leaves in my composting which are collected away from the holly bush. And any leaves that I collect around the holly bush are usually placed into one of those leaf collection bags, and then the township stops by on a weekly basis to take away gardening waste like that. I don't know, every time I find a larger stick like this, I've got a tendency to remove it because it just seems like it's very unlikely that the worms are going to be able to make anything of it in any reasonable amount of time. So I'm more about just excluding that stuff when I happen upon it. I gotta say, the material in here seems so nice. I don't know if it's just because maybe it's a little bit more damp than it usually is. It seems to have a darker color. I mean, gradually over time the system's going to increase in its dark color as more and more worm castings start to pile up, replacing what had been there before, which is the bedding, the leaves, and all the light color stuff. So this system's definitely coming along nicely. We've already been in here to feed 10 times, and today's feeding is going to be number 11. What you see here in this container is what they're getting, and I guess the little red bits are a hint as to what the stuff is. It's the leaves off the bunches of radishes that you buy in the store. So usually you'll buy a bunch of radishes kind of strapped together with a rubber band. And I think the leaves themselves, usually when they sell the leaves with the stuff that you're buying, the leaves themselves are also something that could be used as an ingredient in certain types of foods and stuff. So I think when it comes to the leaves of carrots, for example, I think I heard somewhere that pesto is prepared with those, and that's the reason when you buy a bunch of carrots, you're not getting only the carrots, but you're also getting the leaves. And I assume with radishes it's something else, something similar, or maybe the same. I don't know. I don't eat pesto, so I'm not even sure exactly what that is. I just read that somewhere. Oh, so now I just started finally reaching down into the middle of the bin where we last fed, and it's not too surprising that that's where we're bumping into a fairly large number of worms now. Although every handful has brought with it a pretty good number of worms, so this is a pretty nicely populated system. So this is that other seed, as I mentioned earlier. I did already sort of tear it apart, but it is kind of nice to see both halves of the mango seed reunited again. It's kind of funny, because when you kind of set out to do something and then you're unable to get it completed or just unsuccessful in your attempt, you sort of get a little bit fixated on, hey, where the heck is that other thing? So I've been really kind of curious. I'm glad we finally found it. This is sort of like the stem of a couple bananas, the point where a couple bananas would probably come together, unless it's a single stem that is already just falling apart and looking like two stems. It's all swollen up because it's, you know, all the fibers that are usually pretty densely packed together are all sort of coming apart, and the worms are nibbling it all away. Things look really good in here, I gotta say. Every time we've come in here in the past, I've always felt like perhaps the number of worms that we're spotting is a bit limited, but today it seems like they're not bashful, they're not hiding. We're seeing a good number of worms hanging out. But I do feel like at this point we've more or less tilled up the entire contents of the system. We've located the curious objects that we were in search of and had a chance to check them out. It's time that we gave these little guys their food portion for the day and let them get back to work in peace without all this disruptive handling. You know what? Why don't we... Do we really want to empty the seed? No, you know what? Let's leave the seeds with the seed inside, because I always treat this as like the husk. There's the husk around the outside, and you can see the seed is actually getting nibbled away quite furiously by these worms. So let me let these little guys settle in for a second, and then we'll give them their food. And the worms do tend to, retreat out of the daylight pretty rapidly. They certainly don't like it. I guess by being visible out in the daylight, the worms are totally at risk of being nipped off by some sort of a predator, like a bird could swoop down and grab them really quick, make a quick meal out of them. So it's not surprising that the ones that tend to burrow down are the ones that survive, and the ones that are perhaps not so inclined to do that are the ones that get turned into a yummy meal for some sort of a passerby hungry creature. I'm going to try to keep these halves of the mango seed together so we can place them down into the center of the bin where we're going to drop in the food, so that we can possibly bump into them again next time and see how their progress is. Try not to lose track of their whereabouts. Oh, you know, there was something over here I was curious of checking on, and now I've mixed it in. The one thing I just don't seem to see in my systems this year are any black soldier fly larvae. No signs of the black soldier flies this season for whatever reason, which is a little bit upsetting. Not upsetting, but disappointing. Not going to get upset about what's happening or not happening in my garden if it's just the way nature works. And I can get upset if I make a stupid mistake and end up killing all the plants in my garden or something like that. That's possibly worth getting upset about. But when it comes to the black soldier flies not being around this year, it is a little bit disappointing, because they do such a great job down in my compost barrel breaking stuff down. It's like a bottomless pit with the black soldier flies in there helping to work stuff down, in conjunction with the worms and all the other creatures doing that down there. So I do long for the day when they return, but if they don't show up, it will be a shame, because it'll just take that much longer for the material in my systems to break down. Somehow the weight of this stuff, it's just so light. It's very airy. It made me feel like there was just not all that much food here. But it seems like once I sort of break it all apart, it was in the freezer, so it's kind of sticking together, frozen together. It seems like once I spread it out, it does seem like a pretty decent sized feeding. Gotta remember too, all this other stuff floating around within the system, all these leaves, all the bedding, is all fair game to be consumed as food too by the worms. So even if everything that I gave them during that last feeding 14 days ago is gone now, they're not going to go hungry. They'll definitely have other things to chew on. See, I guess I have deviated here and there by bringing paper products, possibly just to transport some crushed eggshell up from my wormery, and then just drop the piece of paper that it was kind of placed into, a little makeshift envelope or whatever. So I do occasionally plop in a little bit of processed materials like paper or whatever in here, but I think as a basic rule of thumb, I generally don't. And for that reason, I think it does have sort of a more natural appearance to it than my worm bins downstairs. And I think that might be one of the reasons I think it's kind of a novelty too, just because of the way it appears a little different from the rest of my systems. Alright, well, that was a lot of fun, and once again I feel like I've taken way more time getting this done than I needed to. But that's okay. It's always nice to hang out in the garden, get a little fresh air. But now I'm down to the last few things, such as cleaning things up and putting away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's all boring. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.